Hello, everyone. This is Mateo with Arcade. If you're here, you may be as curious as I am about how did 15,000 MCP servers just get released in the last 3 months. And with a couple of exceptions, the answer seems to be mostly tools that automatically turn an API specification into an MCP server automatically, and then just hope for the best. If you've tried this yourself, you may share my opinion that this is a bit of a hit or miss situation. And at Arcade, we believe that API wrappers are the wrong way to think about agentic tools. So I'm here with Renato and Eric, who have been building integrations at Arcade to talk about machine experience engineering. Hi, Renato. Hi, Eric.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for having us. I'm an engineer at Arcade, and I've worked a lot with writing tools for Arcade, and I'm excited to share some of the knowledge that I've gained over the last year.
Yeah, I'm also an engineer at Arcade. I was hired as an integrations engineer, but I like to call myself a machine experience engineer.
That's a perfect segue into my first question, which is machine experience engineering sounds a little bit like a buzzword. And I'd like to hear your explanations of what actually machine experience engineering is and why should tool builders care about it.
Yes, I agree. It does sound like a buzzword, but not because it's inherently empty and used like a vague term that nobody really knows what it is. I think it's just that we do not understand and know about the field yet because it's very recent. But to me, machine experience engineer is analogous to UX engineer, user experience engineering, in the goal of creating intuitive and accessible interfaces that can efficiently address the user needs. The fundamental difference between the two, machine and user experience engineer, is that in the case of machine experience, instead of being human-centered, obviously it is centered on machines or AI models that are going to interact with the interfaces we build. Because now we have these large language models like GPT that can reason in non-deterministic ways, and they can ingest a lot of data, make decisions. Some of these decisions may translate into taking actions like sending an email, querying a database, etc. And in order to, if you want to move to autonomy and give freedom to AI to do stuff for ourselves, which is what we really want them to behave in a more free way, autonomous way, we will not be able to control what they do at every moment, but we can control how they do those actions, like which actions are available to them and how they are able to execute those actions. And so tailoring this process of creating interfaces that control how LLMs do stuff is what we call machine experience engineering.
Yeah, and so, for example, when I was first introduced to tool calling, I was kind of given a goal-oriented definition, and it was something like the goal of tool calling is to reduce the probability of a hallucination of a language model via programmatic code. And so the way I like to think about machine experience engineering is if that's the goal, then machine experience engineering is how we achieve that goal. So it requires knowledge and intuition of common pitfalls of language models and kind of just a deeper understanding of the internal data structures that these language models are constructing.
Yeah, that's super interesting. However, I still feel that building tools as wrappers of existing APIs feels intuitive to me. Like I agree that the user is ultimately not like a human is not the user of uh, LLM tool, but it's a machine. Why not an API? Like at the end of the day, APIs are designed to be used by applications. Why is this approach not working?
Yeah, I cringe every time I just see an API wrapper and it's called a tool. Because if you think about how these API endpoints are written, they're written with the assumption that the downstream consumer is going to have some type of intricate and robust system put in place to process and validate and even handle like complex responses. So if you simply just wrap an API endpoint, you're just putting all of that work on the language model. And with something that's non-deterministic, it's not always the best idea. So you might enable a language model to be able to take a new action by giving it just an API wrapper, but it's going to fail like half the time. Some examples that I've run into is, so I have two for you. One is the post processing. So after you hit the API endpoint, how do you provide that response to the language model? So if the API endpoint, which they commonly do, returns some deeply nested dictionary that like maybe is representing some kind of tree structure of your file structure, like how are you going to make sure that the language model correctly understands that? Or if the API endpoint's returning this deeply nested structure just to represent like the content on a page, how are you going to ensure that the language model presents this information to the end user correctly? And the solution for that is write deterministic code that converts it into Markdown, for example. We've been able to do this for decades. Let's continue to do it. Let's just not forget how to write code just because a language model can automate some of the things that can't be expressed programmatically. Another example is if we take the Slack API, it loves to rely on user IDs. But if I want a language model to send a DM to you, Mateo, on Slack, I'm not going to say send a DM to user 9644282. I'm going to say send a DM to Mateo. And so that requires this machine experience engineering to have a tool that takes a username as input or an email as input and programmatically figure out what is the corresponding user ID that we can then provide to the API.
Yeah, and you also will have an issue that Slack does not offer an endpoint to convert a username to an ID. So you're not able to search the user by its name. So the LLM has to figure, it's going to look for an endpoint like that. It's not going to find one because the Slack API does not offer it. So the LLM has to reason on the fly that it needs to use the least users endpoints and then get a list of all the users. If it's a large workspace, Slack is only going to return like a small subset of it in the first page. So the LLM is going to have to figure out that it needs to paginate the next pages until it finds the user with the correct name. And then maybe by that time, when they reach the page that contains the user ID, maybe there is so much data already in the LLM context that they're gonna confuse what is actually the user that they need. They will be more prone to even select the wrong user, get the wrong user ID, and send the message to the wrong person. So, and since this is a programmable and repeatable task, it makes a lot more sense to code it in a tool because it's always cheaper and faster to execute a tool than to have an LLM reasoning all this stuff every single time someone asks to send a Slack DM. So I think that example that Eric raised is a very good one that highlights how APIs are definitely not tailored for LLMs. And when we have human engineering creating integrations with the Slack API, and it's also valid for every single third-party API service out there on the internet. So when human engineers are going to create an integration, they have like days or weeks to plan the integration and to understand which endpoints they need to call, how they're going to handle possible failure modes for each endpoint. So it's a very thought out process. And now if we expose those same API endpoints as wrappers of tools for LLMs, and we ask them to reason all this stuff in like under a second, and also consume the integration that they just thought out, it's just not going to work well, like not reliably well. They might get it right sometimes, but they will get it wrong a lot of times. And the agents that rely on such tools will be very unreliable as a result, and we will end up actually being kind of useless. And I think one other issue with exposing traditional HTTP and API endpoints to LLMs is that those APIs give a lot of freedom that in some contexts we do not want to expose to the LLMs. Because when the API is implemented, the developers implementing the API take the assumption that a human engineer is going to consume them. So they kind of outsource some responsibility for those engineers consuming the API to use it responsibly and reasonably. But we cannot expect an LLM to be as reasonable and consequential as a human because they make very silly mistakes sometimes. They prove to be very inconsequential at times as well. They can be very gullible. So it's very dangerous to expose API endpoints like entirely without any guardrails to LLMs to call.
Yeah, I mean, language models don't take responsibility. At the end of the day, it's the engineer, it's us that has to take on that responsibility. So
Yeah,
it's our responsibility to responsibly design these tools.
yeah. Also, about what Eric said before, I think there is a mismatch, a very big mismatch between API data models and chat interface data models. So when a human is interacting with an LLM on a chat interface, it has this kind of particular data model. Like Eric said, send a DM to Mateo. So the data model is human centric. But when we look at APIs data models, it's not human centric, so it's more system centric. It's centric to the Slack system, and how Slack is implemented behind the scenes. It's heavily influenced by that. So when LLMs have to navigate those differences is where they fail very often. So our job as tool developers is to create tools with interfaces that match as closely as possible to the chat interface data model. So that if the LLM has a username to send a DM, the tool accepts a username and not a user ID. So the tool may accept a user ID as well, but it gives the LLM the ability to call the tool with a username without the ID. So that's one very important aspect of machine experience engineering that is completely missed when you simply wrap API endpoints as tools.
Renato, I'm curious how that argument stands when maybe you have something like an ambient agent where the process isn't necessarily kicked off by a user saying send Mateo a message.
Yeah, so an ambient agent will be probably ingesting data from one or multiple sources and making decisions on the fly. But at least part of this data model is going to be human centric because the ambient agent will be prompted by someone. It's not like we have these completely autonomous machines. If we had those, we would be in the matrix, right? Like machines that do not take any requirements or tasks by humans. They just simply make their own minds out of the blue and start doing stuff without any connection whatsoever to humans. So since we still do not live in the matrix, every LLM is going to be taking orders or requests from a human, at least partly. And if it's not the case at some point, we're going to have bigger issues with handling the matrix.
Right. Okay. It's prompts all the way down.
Yeah.
This is super cool. So, okay, so I get that the differences are related to like a couple of dimensions. One of them being like cost optimization because the LLMs will have a limited resource, which is the context size. But also there is security. We don't want to be exposing tokens and so on to the LLM directly. And the ergonomics of the API that because the LLM is non-deterministic, it's sort of impossible to predict how well or how effective it will be every time at doing even the same sequence of API calls, for example. But this takes my mind into a different sort of problem for tool builders, I guess, because as an agent builder, if I'm not building any tools, I just get a catalog of tools that the LLM allegedly will know how to use. But what is the right or the correct granularity of the tools? Like the API they tend to be like very specific, very granular. What is the correct, if I have a dial, I guess, from like, do something crazy that involves 200 API calls versus, closer to one tool per API call? Where is kind of like the sweet spot in this slider?
So I think whatever is necessary to make the tool interface match the LLM's data model.
Classic senior engineer response. It depends.
It depends. Yeah, it depends.
Perfect answer.
Yeah. So, for example, we recently implemented a Jira toolkit at Arcade, like a bunch of tools for people to interact with Atlassian Jira. When you create an issue, sometimes you're gonna ask it to create an issue in a particular project if you have multiple. If you have only one project in your Jira account, you simply expect the LLM to create the issue in that project. But that's not how the Jira API works. They require you to provide a project ID. So what we do inside our tools, if the LLM does not mention any project, so the tool takes a project ID or project name argument. So the LLM can provide either of them, either the ID or the name of the project. If the LLM doesn't provide anything because the user did not mention it, we list the projects available in the user's account. If there is only one project, we use that one and simply create the issue there. If they have multiple projects, we come back to the LLM with a very descriptive error saying, hey, we need to ask the user in which project they want to create this issue. So the LLM can understand exactly what information is missing. They can ask the user and then come back and call the tool again with the correct parameter. When they create, for example, a task in Asana, which is another toolkit we have in Arcade, they may want to tag a task with a particular, let's say, I don't know, hello world tag. I'm sorry. So they will never mention the tag ID, obviously. It's the same thing as the user ID and username in Slack. And if the tag does not exist and the user is mentioning the tag, inside our tool, we go ahead. If the tag does not exist, we create it, get the ID of the recently created tag, and then use this ID to create the new task or to tag an existing task with that ID. So inside our tools, we sometimes make like 5, 6, 7, 8 network requests to accomplish one action from the user and the LLM perspective. I don't think a tool would get to a point of like sending 200 network requests. I think that would probably be too many, but like close to 10 requests is not like super weird to have in one single tool call.
Yeah, I feel like the reason why tool or tool calling is such an overloaded term is because it does depend on each individual case. In one case, you could have a tool that just reads a single cell inside of a spreadsheet, and that could have less of a scope than the API endpoint that was called. But then, in theory, you could have a whole agent as a tool, because at the end of the day, a tool is a function in code, and a function in code can do anything. It can call out to one external service, no external services, hundreds of them or thousands of them. It could be long living, it could be short lived. It could spin off its own daemon processes. I mean, now I'm not saying I recommend that much, but the possibility is there, and I think that's a big reason why it's such an overloaded term.
That leads me into my next question, which is correct. So I see that, I guess, the boundary between tool design, tool building for LLMs, or agentic tool building, if you wish, and agentic orchestration, which is the idea of like having the different nodes or the different LLMs act together or collaborate or whatever. This line seems to be blurring a little bit because of these patterns like agents as tools. So if the tool is the interface between two agents, how does this impact the work of people building tools?
Yeah, so I think you're basically asking what is the boundary between agents and tools, right?
Yes.
So I'm going to say something that is going to sound extremely obvious and dumb, but I'm going to explain it. So to me, the fundamental factor differentiating an agent from a tool is agency. By agency, I mean the ability to change course, to make decisions on the fly, depending on inputs in a non-deterministic way. So it requires some level of judgment that cannot be expressed programmatically. So that's agency. And obviously, agents need to have agency. They need to have this sort of freedom to act because the kinds of tasks they have to accomplish require them to make decisions on the fly, and it cannot be programmed. So tools can also change course. So we can do different stuff inside the tool depending on what inputs are coming in, but it's always deterministic. So it's predictable. So depending on how you change the two inputs, you can predict how the tool is going to behave. And there's this expression, for example, agents as tools, right? That I think blurs this line and can create confusion. I think because it kind of mixes these agency and deterministic versus non-deterministic behavior. So I think maybe we should have expressions like agent composition or agent dependency. So maybe you have a higher level agent that is going to break down a task and call sub agents, let's say. So it's going to depend on other agents to accomplish smaller parts of a task. But those sub-agents are also have their own agency, their own level of freedom to judge what to do depending on the context. And all these agents may also call tools. So if the LLM decides to send a Slack message, we don't want it to reason, hey, should I really send this message? Or should I actually send this message to another person? We don't want it to making these sorts of reasoning inside it. So when we call the tool, we want it to be deterministic. And the agent needs it. And the agent developer, most importantly, needs to know when it's relying on a tool that is deterministic and when it is relying on an agent that is non-deterministic. Because the way it's going to try to anticipate potential failure modes and how they're going to put guardrails in is going to be different, whether it's a tool or it's an agent. So I think it's very important, as Eric said, a tool is already a very overloaded term. And I think we should move towards making it more well-defined. And I think one very important property of tools is determinism. So they are always deterministic and predictable. And agents have this non-deterministic behavior, and they need it. So I think that's a very interesting, very important aspect for us to try to understand and break down what is an agent and what is a tool.
To me, that sounds like, I mean, I agree with having a well-defined entity or thing that is the tool that has to be deterministic. However, these patterns are coming up. Like I see agents as tools being built on the same interface that what you call tools are also interacted with, right? So the LLM will make a tool call like a traditional tool call to a deterministic tool. but also using the same interface. It may call a tool, for lack of a better word, I suppose, that has an agent behind it, right? So should we require agents as tools patterns to advertise that they are non-deterministic or have this risk, or like what would you say needs to be added into this channel of communication to disclose like the, hang on, this is an agent, it's not deterministic maybe.
I mean, it sounds like a great opportunity to bring machine experience engineering back into it and provide the language model the context that this tool will be calling out to another language model. It may not be deterministic. This is important context for the language model calling out to that next tool.
That's amazing. So for me, so this means that so machine experience engineering for me was kind of synonymous to agentic tool building, but it's more than that. It's truly like designing or engineering the experience around the LLM, right? It has, regardless of what resource, tool, or agent it interacts with. Is
Right.
that more correct?
Yeah, and it's what's cool about it is it's not just defining an interface that a language model can more easily understand, but also providing a response that a language model can more easily understand.
Right. That's super cool. So, okay, I want to kind of circle back into what I mentioned before, which is this is super interesting if I think about, like, I put my tool builder hat, and this all of this seems very relevant. But if I take this hat off and I put my agent builder hat, and I'm a consumer of tools now, I don't know if I should be an expert in machine experience engineering when I'm building an agent, right? So if I want to just like, I, as an API consumer, I don't really care how the APIs are implemented behind the scenes. I have an endpoint, I know the input, I know the output, I can engineer in my head, this is the correct sequence of API calls or whatever, this is the right post-processing, whatever, and that's everything I need to know. I don't need to care about how these APIs are implemented. So for agent builders, is this the same with respect to machine experience engineering, or is it different?
Well, I think there are two aspects that we have to consider. The first is an agent builder has to be able to select appropriate tools for its agent. It's like if you're writing a Python project, for example, you're coding something using Python. You may need some third-party libraries, and like there might be multiple libraries to do the same thing, same task that you need to solve. So how are you going to choose which of those libraries to use in your project? So it requires you to understand how they are implemented, for example, how they behave in different usage scenarios. Sometimes, if it's applicable, you have to consider the performance aspect. If it's something sensitive for your project, like how much memory does each library consume if it's like this data heavy processing library. So there are a lot of things that a developer needs to know in order to judge whether a library is a good fit or not for its project. I think the same applies to agent building. So when an agent decides to make a group of tools available to its agent, it has to first judge whether those tools are well implemented. Do they offer like a good machine experience to its agent? Because that's going to impact directly on the quality of the agent itself. If the agent relies on tools that are hard for it to understand, it's going to fail more often. So it's going to render your agent less reliable, and people will perceive your agent as worse than others. The agent needs to know at least a little bit about machine experience engineering, in my opinion, in order to be a good agent developer that actually puts agents in production. And the other aspect is that Going back to the Python analogy, we have the standard library that contains a lot of functions and classes that we can use and extend in our projects. And there is the PyPy public catalog of third-party libraries. Probably millions of packages are available out there. Most of them are open source and free to use. But we still, when we go implement a project in a particular domain, we still have to implement our own functions, our own classes, our own modules that are particular to that domain. So I think that's going to happen to agent builders as well. With time, we're going to have growing public catalogs of tools that will be available to agent developers, but there will always be some specialized tasks that are programmable and repeatable. So if there is a task that is programmable and repeatable, that an agent is going to have to execute multiple times, why not program it in a tool and make it available for the agent instead of requiring the agent to reason on it on the fly and call multiple tools or multiple API endpoints, which is going to be more expensive, slower, and more error prone as well. So I think agent builders will not be able to completely avoid writing tools when they're building agents.
Yeah, I think agent developers, we need to realize that tool calling is what, like 2 years old. The term agent may be about the same. And if we think about where we are along the progress of AI in general, but agents as well, we're not in a world today where we can just type sort my array and then it'll sort it. We're in 1990 C programming where you have to implement your own merge sort, right? So today, machine experience engineering and tool building is super important even for agent developers. There are some primitives that are being built out, like what's coming out of Arcade, and we're going to continue to progress so that someday we can get to the world where you can just type sort.
That's super cool. I like the analogy of having like a registry or a package index for tool calls or for agentic tools, I suppose. But because they may offer autonomy to the agent, or they may be executed by an autonomous agent, it's not the same. Like I feel okay with anybody just putting anything on Python. Like I don't care. Like that Python index, if I'm gonna use my thing, I'm gonna look at it, vet it, and see that okay, it's safe for what I want. That is not necessarily true for an agentic tool, like especially the ones that may have side effects. When I had this, like I had a different conversation, and I can link it down below probably, about MCP authentication and the security, all of that. And it seems to me that this sort of index of agentic tools needs to be trusted, right? Because, and I cannot go back and forth between this line between the orchestration platform and the tool calling platform, because there are some things that maybe for policies, maybe for security, or maybe just because they could have undesired side effects. I want these tools to have built-in guardrails somehow. Like I require this tool to have human in the loop if it's going to use my credit card, for instance, right? Or if it's going to submit my taxes, I don't know, like something that could get me in trouble. I don't know, right? So do you envision an open index for these kind of tools, or multiple, like very guarded, kind of private indices?
I think we're going to see a mixture of both. And I think from my perspective, it seems simpler if there was just some open registry where all language models could go to, instead of having multiple private catalogs. But I think private catalogs will also be necessary for many companies with maybe very specific internal software that needs very specific implementations.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I also think, like, okay, for tools that don't have any potential bad side effect, maybe just a wrong calculation, or I spend some more on compute, that's all right. But for the one that triggers some payments or whatever, then maybe I don't use the open one. I don't know. right?
Sure.
That's kind of where I stand. Right? So this is the last question, and it's a more personal question, I suppose, which is if you could wave a magic wand today and make any agent be a reality, what would that agent be?
Go ahead, Renato.
So I would take a license to go more philosophical now. So I think LLMs are, I usually say that LLMs are people pleasing machines. So in the sense that they are very good at grasping what we want to hear and saying that. So I would love to have an agent that is actually the opposite, that would question me all the time and defy my current mental models of everything. So I think a lot of the problems in the world stem from the fact that one, we do not know ourselves, we do not understand the world, and we do not understand the inner self of others. And two, we actually believe we do understand all these three things. So we like to believe that we understand ourselves, that we know ourselves, that we understand the world, and that we know exactly what's going inside the minds of other people. And then we go ahead and make judgments and behave in ways based on these false assumptions. And this creates a lot of issues, like socially. And I think it's very dangerous that we start to interact with AI models that are going to reinforce our current beliefs. That are going to agree with everything we believe, that say we are right, that we have all the reason in the world. I think it's very dangerous because it's going to lead us to comfortably sit in ignorance and misconception. So I would love to have an agent that would do the opposite, that would be constantly questioning me and trying to uncover what is false in my mental models of everything in the world, about other people as well, about my judgments of other people's characters and actions. I think that would make me a more mature and empathetic person. Yeah, but it can't be like just random questioning. Like it requires some deep understanding of human nature to make sensible questions, right?
That's super cool. What about you, Eric?
Uh, well, since I have the magic wand, I kind of want to just go ahead and skip past quite a few major breakthroughs and just say that I would like a general AI agent. So if we think about where we are along the evolution curve of agents, I feel that we're very early. They're very specific to one vertical. You can have your social media agent that is just excellent at creating the best possible social media post, or you can have your spreadsheet agent that's super great at consuming your emails and then outputting it into your spreadsheet. And if we take this as an analogy, you can think of it as we're at the point of super early ML milestones like MNIST, and maybe a chess engine beating Gary Kasparov. They're very specific, right? It's a chess engine, it's not a Go engine, right? Um, so it's an image recognition. It doesn't recognize whether something's a dog or a cat. But eventually, as we progressed, we got to something like GPT. And if today we're at MNIST, I'm looking forward to that GPT, that more general thing. So I think I don't know how many years out in the future that is, but since I'm holding the magic wand, that's what I want.
That's awesome. So I have a question for Renato, which is like considering Eric's answer, which is it requires kind of artificial general intelligence pretty much. Um, what do you think is missing for your agent? Are we closer than requiring artificial general intelligence to make that critical agent?
Yeah, so I think that's going to go very deep into philosophy. Like when I started using ChatGPT, I started questioning myself, what is actually intelligence? You know, they can understand things that are very interesting. They can understand nuances. They can understand motivations behind actions. They can understand irony, but it's still like it still feels to me that there is something about human intelligence. It's more like a feeling that there is something about human intelligence that is not simply about computing. I'm not making any reference to like something religious or supernatural, but I feel there is something about the way our intelligence works that might not be possible to replicate in silicon chips, you know. So maybe the agent that I would like to have that understands my human nature and can uncover false beliefs in my mental models and correctly questions me at the correct points, maybe that kind of agent will never be possible to have because since the silicon chips are limited in how they can express intelligence, they will never be able to understand fully my own human nature, you know. So maybe I don't know.
We have to see. Maybe we need to change the material, replace silicon with something else. All right. So thank you guys very much. This was extremely interesting to me. I don't know if you want to, make some extra remarks about machine learning. Machine experience engineering that I missed in my questions.
Well, thank you, Mateo. Great questions as always. I'm looking forward to doing this again.
All right. Cool.
Yeah,
Thank you guys.
I love to chat with you guys about these subjects. I think it's a very very new field. People are like still a bit lost about how to approach this. I have to say, me and Eric, we are sometimes lost as well. So
What?
we're, we're kind of building the car while we drive it, you know. Um, so it's very good for us to get these ideas out and get people's feedback as well. We would love to hear back from people after they watch this and see what they think about it. Because there's a lot of experience out there that we are not aware of. So I think we have to promote more of these discussions so that this field can mature in a faster way.
That's awesome. So following on what Renato says, if you're watching this and you have ideas, if you agree or disagree with Renato, Eric, or myself, let us know in the comments below. I will put links also down below to all the resources I can think of about machine experience engineering, why Arcade believes strongly that API wrappers are not enough, and see you in the next time. Happy building, guys.